Hello, I'm Alejandro Serrano, and I'm going to be doing a lot of videos similar to this one. And I think I should have been doing this maybe since 2008 or so. But at the time, I wasn't so into technology, or I wasn't really aware of the importance of documenting what was going on in my life, in my cognition, in my perception. So it's been a while. It's been 16 years since I began having different experiences with my cognition and my perception, different from ordinary perception and cognition. So a lot has changed since those days, but I think I can still start documenting what is happening. It's going to be helpful for a lot of people. I'm not the only one doing this. There's a lot of other people on YouTube doing video logs of their experience. I also remember that around 2010 or so, I used to read a lot of forums, and some of those discussions were just like journals of other practitioners, meditation practitioners, and they were documenting their experience as well for other people to read. And I was one of them, and I remember that when I read their entries, a lot of it made sense, but maybe not everything. However, the things that did make sense helped me immensely with my own practice, with my own meditation practice. So I want to do the same with these videos and maybe provide some help for other practitioners out there. And not just that, I think there's a lot of content related to meditation. What to do when something doesn't really go as planned, or when you experience something unpleasant, and like the dark night of the soul and so on. But I think we need some accounts on how to practice the Dharma, not from a teaching perspective, but from a practitioner's perspective. And what's the experience like? What were the challenges, and how did those challenges were overcome? So the goal of the videos that I will be publishing from now on, the goal is to document the transition from ordinary cognition to not so ordinary cognition, and how Dharma practice plays a role in this shift in perception. So let's just start with a little bit of my background and how I ended up practicing meditation and receiving Dharma teachings and so on. I mean, I guess I could start, like I said before, describing the events that happened in 2008, but I think we need to go back a little bit just to have some context and where I was coming from, because before 2008 I wasn't even remotely aware of Dharma or meditation for that matter. It's just someone with a lot of issues, and one of those issues was very, very serious, and it was related to drinking, substance abuse, and all sorts of emotional problems related to those illnesses. And I ended up, going to recovery. I met wonderful people that helped me. The program that I adopted for myself was a 12-step program, although I was, I think, an agnostic at the time. The steps made sense. They made sense because I was, I think, in a good place to surrender and to listen, pay attention, and actually do what I was instructed to do by the people that helped me at the time, my sponsors. I was kind of like really, really tired of suffering, and especially I was really, really tired of the addictions. So I was very willing to do the work, and the 12 steps clicked very well for me, even though it was really hard for me to grasp what a higher power, a higher being was for me, since I was an agnostic, and I didn't really have a tradition that would support my upbringing. I wasn't really raised in a religious context. So although I didn't have a spiritual tradition when I entered recovery, I think the key aspect for a successful recovery was the willingness to do the work. And eventually I started feeling a lot of peace of mind, because I was being very, very honest about my harmful habits, my harmful ways, and that awareness of all the habits I had acquired throughout my life pushed me into making the necessary adjustments to become a better person. And I really wanted to become a better person because I knew I was hurting myself a lot, and I was hurting a lot of people. So being very honest about it did push me into the right direction. It's like the best way to stop fooling yourself, right? I mean, I think it's the only way. If you're not honest with yourself, you can just continue fooling yourself and fooling others and telling everybody that you're doing well and so on. Maybe not fooling others, actually, because everybody else can tell that you are being an asshole or just someone very, very toxic and harmful, right? But I didn't want to fool myself, and I knew I wasn't going to fool everybody else. I wasn't going to fool my family and other friends, partners that I had in the past. So I did the work. I cultivated honesty, and that led me into better behavior. Let's just call it that. So I don't think, we can call that actual Dharma practice, but that was a solid foundation for spiritual practice. Improving one's behavior. Actually, there's a training that corresponds to this in the Dharma, which is right action or ethical behavior, sila, right? So I did a lot of that because of the honesty. And later on, when I received Buddhist teachings, I realized that this is, one of the ways that the Buddha helped others to purify their experience. There's this famous discourse where he tells his son Rahula that the best way to purify his body, speech, and mind was, through observing the consequences of his actions, mental actions, verbal actions, and bodily actions. And if those consequences were harmful, then he should stop doing those actions. And if they would produce benefit, then he should continue doing those actions, right? So that was like so simple. And that was the instruction that he gave to his son. And later I realized that in order to practice those instructions in the most proper way, you had to be really honest, right? Like you had to acknowledge that what you do has terrible consequences. And I don't think a lot of people were willing to do that. At the time I was in recovery, I wasn't really willing to acknowledge all the negative consequences. But I had to. I had to because I had no choice. So I cultivated honesty and realized that my actions led to a lot of negative consequences. It was like clear, evident, and that led me into the right direction. So my life became more peaceful, I would say. Not extremely peaceful, but just enough to say, okay, I think I feel better now, right? Because before, every single day I would be suffering so much anxiety or being ruled by anger and ruled by controlling behaviors and manipulating others and just being a very sadist person, really enjoying the pain of others through just, verbal abuse or manipulation techniques and all that sort of thing. And after the honesty training and the adjustments to my behavior, I wasn't really feeling so much pain anymore. Of course, I wasn't causing much pain to others. I mean, not completely. I wasn't perfect at all. I had so many things to overcome, but I felt better. I felt peace. And after a year or 2 years of, being sober and just going to meetings and being honest about my practice, I suddenly started feeling very empty. Like something was very, very spacious in my heart, in my mind, in my life. I felt that everything was just too ordinary, too plain, like nothing was happening. Nothing at all was happening. And I think that was because all the drama went away. So when you don't have any drama, there is no entertainment, so to speak. So I got bored because since there was no suffering, there wasn't really like a story happening. It was just so peaceful and ordinary. Like suddenly the sense of peace turned into a sense of emptiness. And I was very I don't want to say disturbed, but like surprised that life was suddenly so simple and plain. And I wasn't really enjoying that. I was kind of like reaching some uneasiness, not serious anxiety, but just a sense of unease. And it didn't go away. It was just everywhere. Like every single day I would wake up and it was right there, the emptiness. And it was very disconcerting. I think that was the word that I was looking for. So one day I remember thinking that, if you cannot change something, then why fight it, right? That was one of the first teachings that my sponsors gave me. So if you can't change something, just surrender. Like there's nothing wrong with that, with surrendering. Quite the contrary, it's very humbling, right? So I did that because the emptiness was just overwhelming. The ordinariness was ubiquitous, I don't know how to pronounce that, but it was just present everywhere. And I said, okay, then let this emptiness be here. And I'm just not going to fight it anymore. Let it do its thing or whatever. And that suddenly made sense to me because I thought, well, if I'm not going to fight emptiness anymore, then I don't need to fill this void with anything else, right? And then I was like, well, isn't that like the solution to addictions? Because addictions appear when we don't want to feel this emptiness or this void in our hearts, right? And we look for pleasant sensations, and we try to, experience those sensations all the time. But I said, forget about that. Just accept the emptiness. And that led me to realizing that when one accepts emptiness, one doesn't need to escape anymore. One doesn't need to look for pleasure. So that was just a thought. It wasn't really an experience. But the thought was very, very strong. Like the conclusion, the logical conclusion that I reached was all I could think of for days. And I remember telling my friends, look, I think this is really important. If you accept emptiness, then it's okay, You will be okay in life. And my friends were like, oh, yeah, that sounds very cool, very interesting. But they weren't as excited as I was, I thought that I was reaching a very important insight, a conceptual insight, because it wasn't really verified in my experience until later. So this friend, that heard me say all these things, told me, well, you should look up books by Jiddu Krishnamurti, right? Because he talks about emptiness, and maybe you find something that makes sense, that is connected to what you're saying. And I did. I did get some books by Krishnamurti and started reading them, and they kind of made sense, but not really. It was really hard for me to understand what he was saying. Sorry about that. It was really deep stuff for me at the time, and I wasn't really sure that I was understanding what he wanted to say, so I didn't really click with Krishnamurti. I started reading other authors about, meditation and practicing acceptance and all these stuff, and I think I read that when you accept the emptiness, the open space, the awareness, then you would have like a very huge awakening, a strong spiritual awakening. And I think at the same time, I remember getting Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now. For some reason, that title was just so attractive. I don't really remember why, but perhaps, just thinking that the power of now was connected to the sense of space, the sense of emptiness. And I thought, well, maybe there's something there, right? So I got the book and started reading it, and I was really fascinated with the ideas that Eckhart was saying. I don't really remember all the contents, but I do remember that he talked about the pain body and how we cling to that, and the only way to escape that or transcend the pain body was through this moment, the now, right? Just being in the now. And that's what I did, after reading that book. I was just like focusing all the time on the now and space and accepting the feeling of emptiness, and nothing really happened. But I knew something was like beyond perception, if you want to call it that. And then later one day when I was, driving home. I wasn't driving myself. I was riding in a taxi. And when we were like just stuck in traffic, I was heading home from the office. I was thinking about speech. I remember this very clearly, and I was thinking that all of us argue, right? And an argument is basically made up of one person's ideas versus another person's ideas. And I could see in my mind how those two forces were colliding, It's like two armies, but instead of soldiers, you would have ideas. So one army of ideas was fighting another army of ideas, and they would just be colliding and just, creating all sorts of conflict. But then at the same time, I remembered that my habits, specifically my habit of arguing with people and fighting with people, just being very aggressive, verbally aggressive with people, was something that sometimes I could control and sometimes I wasn't able to control it. And I remember this because my sponsor in recovery told me that many of our harmful habits are not in our control. Our illness is sometimes bigger. It's like you need to surrender instead of like trying to control something that will be more powerful than yourself. So, like, for example, alcoholism, right? That's just something that cannot be really controlled through will. You need to like surrender into something more wholesome and bigger than yourself. That's what the higher being is supposed to do. Or God, or whatever you want to call it. You surrender yourself, your will and your life to this more wholesome power, because one cannot really control the illness. It's too big, right? So I was thinking about that when I was in the back seat of the taxi, and I thought, well, maybe I need to surrender, surrender, because if someone else is being super aggressive, verbally aggressive, maybe they cannot stop. So what's the point in trying to change, their aggression, trying to point out that, hey man, you're being like super aggressive and you need to change this right now. If they cannot change that because it's beyond their control or beyond their awareness, it's like absurd to continue trying to stop someone else. So I thought, well, let them, yell or whatever. Let them be verbally abusive. Just understand that it's beyond their control and obviously beyond my control. That's like super evident. And just by thinking those words, I experienced a change in my cognition. Because for some reason, just surrendering to the inevitable nature of someone else's unwholesome habits led me to surrender in many more ways, in many more like planes and dimensions. I was like, what if I surrender to everything else, not just conditioned behavior, conditioned illnesses, but surrender to all the other things that I do not control. Like, for example, the emptiness, that it was everywhere around me. And I did. I surrendered to everything else. But I surrendered through my cognition, through my perception, And that's when I think I experienced for the first time, I had a taste of the meditative absorptions, of the bliss of meditation. Like that act in itself revealed a different way of abiding and a different way of cognizing and relating with sensations and phenomena. So I was blown away, really blown away. I remember just being super happy, being so like, wanted to laugh. I was like, holy shit, like this is something really big. A lot of people should know about this, right? So I told a lot of people what had happened, and as best as I could, because it was really hard to describe what I was sensing, and some people were like, wow, I'm so happy for you. I remember telling my mom, and she was like really scared. She thought that I was losing my mind and that I was having a psychosis episode or something like that, which I wasn't. I was just too excited, I was really, really amazed with the experience I was having, because it was present for a couple of days. This sense of bliss and clarity and colors started being more shimmering and more vivid. It was really cool. And I think, in some Dharma communities, this corresponds to a stage that is called, if I'm not mistaken, the arising and passing away of phenomena. That's the name of the stage, the arising and passing away of phenomena. So after that, I talked to a friend about it, and he said, well, you should talk to my teacher, because I think he can help you with this and give you more teachings and also answer all of your questions, right? Because I did have a lot of questions. I was like, what is this, Like, for instance, is this what the religions are talking about? Is this experience what the religions of the world are mentioning? Because suddenly I wanted to make sense of that meditative experience through spiritual teachings, spiritual traditions. So I started reading a bunch of Wikipedia articles on Hinduism and Christianity and Buddhism, and I was able to understand more. I remember feeling, okay, I think they're talking about something that does exist, There is something to these words that they are saying. So anyway, I went to this teacher that my friend suggested, and he turned out to be an American Lama. Lama is a teacher in Tibetan, and he was a monk living in Mexico City, and he was teaching the Dharma. He was sent by his teacher to teach the Dharma, in Mexico. And I was lucky enough to be there to meet him and, and make a connection with this person. I explained to him what had happened. He listened very clearly. We ended up talking for 2 hours or so. And he told me, well, I think you got some things right and other things not so right. But it's okay. Everybody, goes through that. So I think if you listen and practice the Dharma, so and so will happen. But it's like a big, big commitment, he said, because once you start practicing the Dharma, everything will change in your life. Your relationships, work, family, your relationship to sensations, to pleasure, to unpleasant sensations, everything, And some people will stay and others will certainly leave. I remember he said that, and I was a little bit scared when he said all those things, because I was like, well, I don't want my life to like go through a radical change, you know. I just went through one big radical change when I joined recovery. But still, you know, the curiosity was just too big, because once you see the effect these meditation experiences have on you, you're just like, well, I want to know more, right? Like the bee had already stung. Is that, I don't know if that's the right conjugation of the verb, but I was stung by the bee of spirituality, and I was like, yeah, okay, let's go to the teachings. And so I started going to the sessions, his teaching sessions, and he came from a tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, which, for those of you that don't know, Tibetan Buddhism is a sort of Dharma that is very ritualistic, ritual-focused, very esoteric. They teach Tantric Buddhism, and it could be very hard for people that are not really open to rituals that are not part of your culture. And since I'm obviously not Tibetan, I was kind of like overwhelmed by all the Tibetanness of the rituals and the prayers, because all the prayers were done in Tibetan. I mean, we had the translations, but still it was like super orthodox. It is a very different type of Buddhism compared to, say, Zen Buddhism. Zen is like very minimalist compared to Tibetan Buddhism, or even Theravada Buddhism, which is based on the words of the Buddha himself. Tibetan Buddhism is based more on the Tantras, and the Tantras are very symbolic. So it was overwhelming, but I stayed because what the Lama said made sense. So that was in 2008. I became a Buddhist and received initiations and instructions and empowerments to practice Buddhist Tantra. And I started practicing almost daily. And, you know, all those experiences shaped my cognition a lot more. 16 years have passed since that day, and the transition, the shift in my awareness is still happening. I know that I am not done. I have many realizations of the nature of Dharma and the truth of the Dharma, but there is still, I can sense there is still a lot of karma that I need to purify, and that is happening, slowly happening. So I just wanted to say that, because I'm not claiming any spiritual attainments yet, but I do think, I do know that my cognition is not the same from that time compared to what I sense today. And everything has happened because of Dharma practice and meditation practice. That's a very small summary of what has happened and why I am involved with meditation, Buddhism, and Dharma practice in general. I'm going to stop now and maybe do another video on a different subject related to Dharma practice. So thank you for listening. I hope this wasn't too slow or boring for you. See you later.